Very warm good morning to Dr. Mona Shah, who, in spite of her busy schedule, has taken off time to speak with all of us. In fact, the topic that she is going to talk about today is outlook for cities, smart or smarter to 2020 and beyond, as was informed earlier. In fact, let me just give a brief introduction of the speaker of today. Dr. Mona N. Shah has served as Dean of India's most remarkable academic institution, the NICMAR, the National Institute of Construction Management and Research, as all of us know, and the RICS School of Built Environment, Amity University. So she was instrumental in launching several pioneering postgraduate programs, and she has done her doctorate in the area of real estate. So I think she would be a better speaker to tell us about the opportunities that is available to all the construction professionals. She has led consulting projects for international, national, and private companies. She has conducted over 250 training programs up till now, and she is the recipient of Excellence Awards in Teaching and Research. So she has turned entrepreneur recently, having launched her firm, Vayati Systems and Research Inc. in 2018. So that's all about the speaker today. So a brief about the organization that I am representing. My name is Anil Kumar Pillai, and I am from the Ramco Cements Limited, and this series of webinars has been organized so that all of us connect together, especially in this time of crisis. So we can connect together, and we have been launching several events on various topics, ranging from blended cements to reinforcement detailing, and then we had some general topics as well. And today is one of them. The smart cities. As all of you know, Ramco Cements has taken several initiatives. In fact, in terms of, I'm just not able to change the screen. In terms of selling cement, cement used to be sold as a commodity, but then what we have done is that we are following this dictum: the right product for right application, wherein we understand the concrete requirements of the customers and then specify the type of cement. So what the approach that we follow is give a questionnaire to understand the concrete requirements. Now through this process, what happens is that the construction professionals would be able to design a concrete mix which is optimum, and they would be able to select the right type of cement. So amongst the various brands of cement that we have got 12 brands of cement, ranging the types of cement, which are ordinary Portland cement, Portland Pozzolana cement, Portland slag cement, rapid hardening Portland cement, which is meant for precast works, sulfate resisting cement. So that is the kind of products that we have got as far as cement is concerned. For non-structural applications also, we have got array of dry mix range of products, which can be used for fixing tiles, which can be used for aesthetics, like we have the Superfine and many other products which can be used for non-structural applications. So we at Ramco, we have products for both structural as well as non-structural applications. And one more thing, when we talk about smart city, we are talking about an integration of being environmental friendly, using technology for making it happen, so that all of us are interconnected even within a city. That interconnectedness is what is mentioned, what is the key point as far as smart city is concerned. So that is very important, and we have also in our organization taken several initiatives to see how we can reduce carbon footprints. Like, say for example, our plant has the most modern technology that is there. By virtue of using technology right from mining till packing, we are able to make a cement that serves the requirement of concreting for the customers. Like, say for example, even if you take the case of mining, instead of drilling and blasting, we have got surface miners, which is much more environmental friendly, and we have also got vertical roller mills, so that the particle size distribution of cement can be controlled. So these are some of the technology that we have adopted in our cement manufacturing process. Now, realizing this, we are the only recipient of the prestigious 4 Leaves Award for being leadership in technology and for reducing emissions. Because it is very challenging for an industry like cement to be environmental friendly, but we have taken all possible initiatives, both at the manufacturing side and at the customer interaction level as well. Because while interacting with the customer, we need to ensure that they are using the optimum cement content and able to fulfill their requirement. So that is from the customer interaction level as well as from the manufacturing level. So that is very important, and that is some of the initiatives that we have been taking over the years. So that's it about Ramco Cements, and then I am sure that many of you would be eagerly waiting for the speaker. In fact, when I spoke about the topic, the smart city, the first and the foremost thing that came to our mind was, we have heard about smart people, but when we hear about cities being smart, we have heard about smart cities as well. But do we know what exactly is a smart city? That is one of the questions that came up the mind. And it is an amalgamation of all that: technology, environmental friendly, being connected to each other, aspirations of people, which is most important. So whether the people's aspiration can be fulfilled. So India as a country is multicultural, having a lot of diversity. So there is no standard definition as such for smart city. It may change from the level of development, from the level of change that can be adopted. So to throw more light on topic of this interest, I am sure that many of you would be interested in this topic. I invite Dr. Mona Shah to start off with a presentation and to speak to all of you and share her valuable inputs. And I am sure that this interaction would be useful to all of us. Over to you, ma'am. If you're able to share your screen, it's okay, or otherwise I will ask Karthikeyan to help you out with that.
Yes, I can share my screen.
Right.
But at the outset, I should thank Ramco. I should thank you particularly for taking this initiative and your team. I should also be thanking the panelists who are here, and Karthikeyan, who's helping from behind, and also all those who have logged in. It is not an easy time. 10 o'clock can be the peak time for home chores, and none of us must be feeling so too smart, at the moment, because we have that on our minds. But nonetheless, I'm really very to all of you for logging in, and let us see how we can take this forward.
Not able to do that.
So,
okay.
I will just share the screen now with all of you. Give me a moment. I think we have some bandwidth issues here.
Yeah. Panelist, I'm not able to.
Mr. Pillai, I'm not able to share the screen. Can you do that for me, please?
Okay. Yeah. All panelists are there. It is not there. It is not there. Can you do something else? There is no. It's not there. There. I'm not able to do that. I'm not able to click that. Right click. Okay. Yeah. It's not coming. Can you change that this thing? You're able to.
Now she can able to do that.
Are you able to share the screen, ma'am?
And now
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Okay, so here we are. I hope you are all able to see this now.
Yes. You can just click on that slideshow.
Yes, that and it's can we start now?
Yeah, please. We can.
Can we start?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this is I would like to just for a few seconds ask you to reflect on this picture. You can see on top there's a lemonade stand, something cool in our days. But what lies beneath is what I want you to focus on. In any city, we, the people, we go about our daily work so easily uh, without much of a glitch. This is what is an ideal situation. Most of us see that when we travel abroad. Most of us don't see this so much in India. But what you see beneath is that, there is construction. You can see a truck there. There are those factories. There are the manufacturing companies that are working. There is telecom. There is so much happening below. There is the logistics which brings in essential goods for us into the city. Somebody is making this happen while we, the citizens, go about our daily work. So when we are talking of smart cities, we are talking of exactly what lies beneath. What makes a city work seamlessly and efficiently in order that its citizens are able to go about their daily work and be their productive best. This is what a smart city generally would be promising to its residents. So having said that, I will just quickly take you to the next slide and try to give you the flow of presentation. I'll cover four broad aspects. One is, of course, why we had this webinar. You have very kindly invited me to be on this panel simply because all of us have suddenly gone virtual. On a normal day, Mr. Pillai, you would have been doing your work, you would have been selling more cement, and you would be overseeing your team. I would have been doing my work, which is probably, taking classes somewhere or doing some research. But today, this pandemic has literally brought a few things to us in 100 years were not as close. So I will be devoting a little bit of my presentation related to the pandemic, then go into what the cities are and what they really mean for all of us. What exactly is a smart city within the whole macrocosm of cities? And of course, I would need to speak a little bit about the smart cities mission in India and how we are going about it. And the last part would be really something that I would like to add as my own little outlook, which is making the city smarter than what it is, So it would not necessarily mean the scope I would like to clear here is not necessarily brick and mortar. It's not about saying that this company, this industry will have a turnover which would be between X% to Y%, or it is not about saying that so much market share or things like that. It is basically a whole view of what we, the people in the city, and how we use our technology, because that is what is going to make the whole thing smart. So my scope is very clear. It is about talking about the technology that we are going to adopt and the people that we will have to obviously change behaviors. We will obviously have to adopt a whole new set of things to make us smarter, which is going to make us, get out of this crisis sooner than later. So this is where the clarity of the scope comes in. I have assumed that all of us who have joined this panel know what SMART is, or have at least heard of what SMART is all about. And therefore, I'm not going to go into detailing what smart cities are and stuff like that. We always feel the difference when we travel abroad, that some cities appear to be very, they appear to be very responsive, to whatever we want when we land up there. And we find that even in our own city, sometimes response is not so quick, or so these are things that actually tell you what a city is and to what level it has moved in terms of its smartness. So I will be speaking about this, and as I said again, I'm repeating. I assume that everybody over here knows what smart is, and or has some idea about it. So, as I said, the first part is about the pandemic. We all must know that the pandemic is something which happens suddenly, and it dislocates entire humanity. I mean, the way it has happened here in this at the moment is something unprecedented. These are the words that are being used over and over and over again, and that's true. It it is unprecedented. It is disruptive. I would say that it actually attacks not just our the human bodies, but it attacks our ability to be industrious. All of us are programmed to do work. All of us do not like a free meal. So we like to work and we like to earn our living through our industry. But that is under attack. But what I would like to emphasize here is cannot dislocate is our ingenuity. The human spirit and human ingenuity will always triumph. And as you see in the course of my session, you will see me focusing more and more on our people and our technology. This is exactly what I would like to say at the outset and up to the end of the session. There is a pandemic. What is the first reaction to managing it? There are four elements that are working almost like an infinite loop, right? And which are those four elements? They are, of course, the leadership, the technology, the economic factors, and the governance factors. These are the primary areas in which we have interventions happening during such times. My contention here is that for this loop to really serve its purpose, there is only one way in which a pandemic should be managed, and that is with a clinical scientific approach. It cannot be emotional. It cannot be apocalyptic. It cannot be like that. It just has to be managed as a clinical approach. And of course, the key to success is our ability to deliver a rapid response. So it might sound a little odd that we are looking at a clinical scientific approach when, let's say, people are dying, or let's say people are hungry, or let's say people don't have any money to buy their essential goods. When I say this, we are talking of containing the pandemic, because as humans, we have evolved to such an extent that we would look rather messy if we were not able to manage this. And therefore, we must the only approach here is a clinical scientific approach, and that yes, some of us are going to be, or rather most of us are going to be inconvenienced with whatever happens in the short run, but that is the only way to manage it in the long run so that we get out of it. So I'm overemphasizing the need for a clinical scientific approach and allowing governance, allowing leadership to actually take charge with this kind of an approach in delivering the. So, what are the priorities in the immediate, short term and medium term? Because any outlook is always time bound. So, we've got to see how this approach works. In the first place, the virus to save lives. This is what we have to do. And this is absolutely urgent and emergent. We cannot say that, we are going to look after the economy or we are going to do something else. We just have to save lives. So we need to procure medical equipment. We have to provision for medicines and vaccines. We have to have a medical staffing, adequate medical staffing. We have to have medical facilities being created, and we have to reach out to other international bodies like, say, the WHO and relevant bodies who are going to help us to contain this pandemic in the immediate circumstance. And we are seeing it playing out now. The second, when I say that these are immediate short-term and medium-term. They are in no way siloed. They are happening simultaneously, but the effects are seen over the short-term or the medium-term. So the next is, of course, shoring up a failing economy. So obviously, you saw the government coming in and offering financial relief or tax breaks to businesses or stimulus packages or its effects on global commerce. We saw that some in turn trying to generate domestic demand. So these are some of the interventions to shore up a failing economy. The third, which I would say is in the medium term, will give us results. All these efforts are going to give us results, say in the next 6 months to 1 year, to prepare for the fastest and the firmest recovery. The firmest recovery means that we don't have such a pandemic re-emerging and again devastating more lives. So we have to have a plan in place and to get back the failing economy and also to save lives. So how do we, what are the interventions? There should be no new outbreaks. There has to be a plan to generate employment. There has to be a plan to give youth some kind of help for starting up new ventures. These have to be tech driven. There have to be skills that are imparted to the people in order to come back into the mainstream of work. There has to be vaccination ready for the population. And obviously, this is the time we sit back and look at setting up robust and resilient systems to combat these free falls in the future. This is exactly how humanity has moved, through ages, always building on a disaster or a calamity, but emerging strong at the end of it. These are things that the last is exactly where my space is, and this is what I'm trying to be talking about in the rest of the session.
Can I just intervene for a moment? In fact, in terms of shoring up a failing economy, how do you think construction sector would be affected by that? What is your view on that?
Everybody talks about the construction sector being forefront of a recovery, and that is true because we all know about the multiplier that the construction sector offers to the economy. It is, in fact, the second or the third most important sector after agriculture. So, and obviously there are around 3 crore people employed in construction also. So because of this employment multiplier as well as the income multiplier effects, we see that construction is going to be given its due importance. Already there are going to be packages. We already have low interest rates and all that. And subsequently, I will be mentioning this also in the rest of the session. And perhaps it can come more clearly through a Q&A after some time. So sure. Yes, construction will have a big role to play is what I can say at the moment. Going to my next slide, you can see that, as I said, humanity has always come out top of the pops whenever a calamity has stricken it. Now, why I've taken just the Spanish flu as an example to show you how it was overcome 100 years ago. After that, we've had some very serious outbreaks like the swine flu and the SARS. So those were restricted to certain countries and they were able to contain it, though they were widespread and they were ubiquitous. So in terms of two of the features of a pandemic, that they widespread and it can be found with anybody in the population. This particular pandemic is different and therefore has been taken for as a study is because it was very large. The mortality was massive and it lasted for some time. So I would like all of you to focus on the fact that in the short run, it is obvious that industrial employment and output is going to fall in those areas that are severely affected. It is natural. Bank assets are also under pressure and they are going to erode. A lot of value is going to be eroded and the durable goods consumption is going to come down. This is given. This is bound to happen. But I want you to now look at how do we come out of this and how fast do we come out of it and what has been the experience 100 years ago. NPI over here means non-pharmaceutical intervention. So in other words, we are using the word social distancing a hell of a lot nowadays. So a social distancing is a form of an NPI. Now, wherever social distancing has been used, the speed and aggressiveness of that implementation led to faster recovery of the economy. And if you just glance at the graph on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see that those red spots are all those cities which were severely affected and were in a negative, growth kind of a stage. Some of them are very, the manufacturing employment had fallen as well as the mortality rate had risen. So you see then that they were in a bit of a soup. Whereas those in the blue are generally tending towards of the graph and they were doing well. That means on all three aspects, which is employment, output, assets and consumption, they were doing fairly better even during the pandemic. Why? We'll see that in the Q&A, but suffice to know that some of the city managements had put in extremely aggressive and strong NPIs in place. And that's where they were able to pull back faster than those managements which were susceptible to a more lax kind of a intervention. So we find that speed and aggressiveness of implementation leads to faster recovery of the economy. So all of us today must be feeling that when will I get out of the house and when will I be able to be normal again? Look at this graph and take some solace and in the fact that what we are doing right now is is contributing to a faster recovery. In some of the cities, it was also found that early pullbacks of NPIs led to a kind of a reactive situation, and there was a spike in the cases all over again. So it will not help to be hasty when we try to take off the lockdown, because we are saying that so many jobs, because every single day we are reading that so many people are unemployed, so much is the loss, and so many people are going to going to fall back into poverty. Yes, this is so alarming that it makes us feel that we've got to get out of this fast. But the caveat is that if we do something hasty, we are going to be paying for it even more at some other point in time. If you look at the cases of Taiwan, China, and Singapore recently, you have seen that they have not only limited their infection growth, they have also mitigated the worst economic disruption. They are almost back to normal. Almost. When I say this, it is very relative, but they are almost back to normal because all three countries have been extremely aggressive about the lockdown. Finally, of course, this is quote unquote Sergio Correa and Stefan Luck. Well calibrated, early and forceful NPIs should not be seen as having major economic costs in a pandemic. So people and our collective psychology, our collective psyche must stop telling us that, okay, this is enough and I need to get out and I need to get normal again and I need to go out and be, as if it was absolutely, nothing very great. We should not be having that kind of an orientation. We have to be more resilient. We have to know that to get out of this, we need to sacrifice a few days of our lives. So this is something I wanted to show you, and there's good data available also for us to see what has been the past experience on this. So I go on to the next part of the session is cities and what is a smart city. So I would like to tell you that every city has an area, every city has people, every city has its own share of industry, its own share of commerce, its own share of every other, economic institution you can talk of. But the smart city, they say, is a city which has added technology in the whole equation. So this is what this slide signifies. Now, I don't have to underscore the importance of cities. I think practically everybody here in this session knows that our cities are the bedrock of growth. They are engines of growth also. So in 2011, the census said that we were 31% urbanized, but projected 2030 is 40% and projected 2050 is 50% of Indians will be in the urban areas. Contribution to GDP, again, all of us know, it was 63%. It is projected to be 75%, and it is bound to grow to 80% in 2050. Already we know that 69 metropolitan cities along with their hinterlands are expected to contribute over 50% of India's incremental GDP between 2012 and 2025. That has almost happened because now we are in 2020. And of course, it is very good for me to share with you that there are certain states that are very high performing states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Kerala, where the standard of living of the people is almost comparable to the richer countries. And this is not what I say, this is what the World Bank and McKinsey study has reported. So we are talking of sensitive cities who are now, important cities who are now vulnerable, very, very economically vulnerable to this crisis. Most of the cities we know in Maharashtra, like Mumbai and Pune, are already under severe lockdowns because of the increase in cases there. Gujarat is increasing at a faster rate also. So Kerala has just gotten out of a crisis. So we are seeing that all these states and the cities therein are important. I mean, we've just got to be very careful with these cities. Also, my worry when I talk of smart to smarter is that we have just been able to get a few million out of the poverty line. There were so many BPL households in India, but over the last more than a decade and a half, from 2005 to 2018, I have some data which shows that we have brought out more than 30% of the households from the BPL into, out of severe poverty into a better state. Now, worldwide also, there is a lot of talk happening. There is fear that all these people who have been able to come out of poverty might just slide back into it sooner than later because of the pandemic. And therefore, there is a lot of stuff that we need to do. And here comes in the collective psyche that I mentioned to you earlier. We need to do something about this. We can't allow these people to slide back into poverty. Now I come to the other part of just telling you the personal preference in understanding smart cities. I know that you all have been reading a lot about smart cities. This is literature which is very commonly available. Every city and every country has its own style of defining what a smart city is. But having started research on smart cities very early on, which was almost 5, 6, 7 years ago, I preferred to use the Boyd Cohen Smart City Wheel, and I still prefer to use this because I feel that this is one tool that talks of smart cities in a very easy manner, and it is easily understandable because it shows you in one graphic what a smart city entails. So you have these 6 dimensions of a smart city, and you have these indicators which say that the city is smart if the number of, say, take any one of the indicators, I'll say green buildings. If the number of green buildings in that city is high. And that should be of interest to you, Mr. Pillai, because you spoke about how you are working on making your cement green. So the more greener the is, the more environmentally friendly it is, the more sustainable it is. So it is an indicator of a smarter city. Take on the other hand, let's say smart mobility. Now, when we say smart mobility, I am a resident of Noida and I have difficulty breathing. Those few months in the year, they simply choke me up. That means there's something wrong with the way we are managing public transport or not, or the lack of it. So obviously in a smart city, this would be taken into account, and there would be very positive interventions in ensuring that the people get their right to live, their quality of life improves, which brings me to the element of smart living. Smart living means that the citizen enjoys a safe or a healthy life. In smart people, we talk about how skilled the people are, how innovative they are, and how they are, educated, and they are able to be globally competitive. We are talking about kind of people. And smart economy obviously talks of how the industry is helping to get more revenue for the city. And smart governance talks of how well the government provides its services to the people and all other constituent members of a city, be it industry, be it other government agencies also, be it the people. So this is why I like the Boyd Cohen Smart City Wheel, and I have used this to talk about our pandemic, our outlook for smart, and I mean, our smart idea, the smarter bit of it, and in the backdrop of the pandemic. Of course, I will not be touching on all six because 1 hour is not enough to, describe everything. I will, because of the pandemic, I'm only going to be focusing on the smart economy, the smart governance, the smart living, and smart people, because as I said, it is human, it is the human part that I would like to focus on, because we are the most affected, and the industry, which is again the most affected, and of course governance, because it is the government who is trying to get us out of all this. So I am only going to be focusing on these four aspects. Now I need to focus on India and its smart cities mission. Again, all of us know that the 74th Amendment of the Constitution gave a lot of powers to the urban local bodies and the panchayats to take decisions around development for themselves. So, if I were to say that the smart city, the engines of growth and everything, we needed to have infrastructure in place. So we needed to have basic and augmented services in the for areas like transportation, water, sanitation, solid waste, power, and housing. We needed to have a certain quality of people also who were willing to be innovative and entrepreneurial. We needed to ensure that there was growth of industry and the services sector because of a better infrastructure that was made available. Then, of course, we had to improve the city competitiveness because cities are now global. There's a whole theory which has gone around now for the last few years, which says that we don't compete as countries anymore. We compete at the level of cities. So even cities raise finances in the world market for development, through municipal bonds and, so they need to be such that they are attractive to any fund manager so as to invest funds, or even for the sovereign funds to come and invest in India. So we need to make our cities competitive. Higher quality of life and ease of living for the people in the city. That is also something that Smart Cities mission wants to enable. And of course, a transparent and responsive government. This whole thing gets tied in by the responsiveness of the government. I cannot underscore this fact more, that it is the government which is at the center of all this when we talk of smart and smarter. And of course, we have to attract and retain world-class talent and skilled workforce. So what has the Smart Cities mission been up to? They have in 2 phases managed to identify in a phased manner 100 cities that India in India that can be good for that can be taken into the realm of the smart. So the total value of the projects that have been, and this is as per the RFPs, RFQs, and the EOIs, and this is from the Government of India website, MoHUA website, where around 2,05,000 crores worth of projects have already been, have been prepared and are ready for. We also talk of area-based development, the value for which is 1,64,000 crores. Now, this is something very interesting because this area-based development is about infrastructure creation. And this means better roads, better sanitation, better sewerage, everything, So it is, and the area has to be developed into a green and resilient area. So area-based development is also earmarked, and almost more than 50% of the total value is for the ABD. Of course, the coverage is 10 crore people, and the projects are available in 3 categories, which are less than 100 crores, and those which are 100 crores and above, and those which are available through a PPP basis. So this is what key data I'm telling you, I'm sharing with you about the Smart Cities mission. But as I said, the Smart Cities mission itself has gone through 2 major phases. In the initial phase, it was all about optimizing its existing infrastructure. So if I was a city manager, I would go to the center and I would say, give me some funds, because a lot of my water losses are, as we say, revenue, or they may be through theft, or they may be through, some reason, or electricity for that matter. Or I would say that my slums don't have basic services and I need to provide basic services. So they were very physical infrastructure oriented, where every city manager thought that if I gave a better set of services, the people would become more productive. So they were actually just trying to make more efficient or optimize the existing infrastructure, and to provide a better quality of life for the city's residents. Along with that, in order to monitor the 24/7 water supply, for instance, or the theft of electricity or water or whatever, in order to monitor that this was happening properly, they created something called an integrated command and control center. It was just a monitoring agency in its earlier version. They encouraged the Smart Cities mission, said that please also develop some app-based solutions. For example, if I'm traveling from point A to point B and there is a traffic jam, it tells me that, okay, you can take an alternate route to reach your destination. So, they encouraged engineering institutions and everybody to develop some basic apps, because they knew they could not put in a metro in place immediately. So up until then, to improve the efficiency, they thought maybe an app-based solution is a better idea. So the key projects there were 24/7 water supply, solid waste management, some mobility decisions such as whether to go in for a metro or a BRTS. All those things began to happen in phase 1. And of course, startups, to create an ecosystem for startups and skill building. And these were small initiatives which had key impact. Some cities opted for something like a lighthouse project, just to build the skills of the which were school dropouts, or who did not want to go further with higher education, or say a placemaking site. So we see many cities like Bhubaneswar, or we see Pune, where experiments have been made in key areas to reduce the traffic and give the pedestrian the joy of walking on the streets, sitting by the wayside, and enjoying a cup of coffee. So these kind of, and of course, laying fiber optics. Now, if you see, of course, there has been a complete priorities, one can say. The current phase now, because a certain degree of maturity has been reached by the city managements also, the government has now upped the ante in terms of initiating a technology-driven smart city. So some of the schemes that they have promoted are the Data Smart Cities scheme, the Climate Smart Cities scheme, the City Investments to Innovate, Integrate and Sustain, and of course the National Urban Innovation Stack. All of these are actually data-driven systems, which will collect data in real time and feed all the people, all the decision makers, in order to take very real-time and responsive decisions. The lower part of that is extremely important, because while I was preparing for this session, I had some ideas that what is the government now doing with the smart cities? Are they really going to be as responsive as, say, a Wuhan was or a Taiwan was? And guess what? I was so happy to see that already the city, the Smart Cities mission has on its website something called the Indian Urban Pandemic Preparedness, where they are calling for, calling people to come and, contribute towards making some policy or making some kind of a which will make us more prepared. I was extremely impressed. Also, there was another one, which was futures post COVID-19. I mean, we had discussed this. I had thought of how will life be in post COVID days way back in like 24th March, and already the government in a month's time has something where they have now initiated. It's a call for new ideas from people that how can we actually make something available in terms of a future post COVID. Now, also there is formulating better projects and empowerment of cities with data. The government is very clear now that it wants data, and that data is going to be used to ensure that the city gets smarter than what it was. This is very clear, and this is very, and it is very heartening to see that the government is serious about this. I can just tell you what the Smart Cities mission is doing. The integrated command and control centers, which were actually, monitoring
There's some problem in the connectivity. We are able to see your presentation. Just bear with us for 1 or 2 minutes. Meanwhile, the speaker is getting back to the presentation. Karthikeyan?
Hello.
Karthikeyan?
Yes, sir.
There's some problem, I believe.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Internet problem due to low band.
Okay. So I think it has been a very interesting topic because it has been taken at the macro level, and very interesting to see how things are changing and what kind of measures are being taken. And another very important aspect that we can look at this is we can also see the very dynamism of it. It is not a very static way of looking at it, but very dynamic way of looking at it and how things are changing. So smart cities are here to stay. That's what the speaker is emphasizing on. And I am sure that this would be of interest to all of us, especially.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Now you are able to
hear.
Am
I audible now?
Yes. Now you are audible. Yes. Please go on.
Where had I left? I mean, where was I? Where did I stop?
Initial, just slide before this, I believe. COVID-19 at smart city. Okay.
Yeah, this one. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that the initial integrated command and control centers immediately moved to be responsive towards identifying, tracking, and monitoring COVID-19 cases. So the GIS-based system is now trying to get not just civic activities, but also law and order and enforcement agencies on the same platform in order to ensure a concerted response to this pandemic. So this is how we are, what I'm trying to actually emphasize is how India is now getting to use its intelligence in a manner which was not seen earlier, even though we were city bred. I'm a third generation city resident, and I really don't know what rural India is. But even though I lived in a city, the city never appeared this smart to me as it is now. That's what I'm trying to emphasize here. Going further, they didn't stop at that. Heat maps are generated to help make decisions regarding continuation or lifting of lockdowns. So now they've actually begun to use the data to generate their own decision-making tools. Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Delhi, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh have already availed of this facility. So also please note that in my earlier slides, I had shown that Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Kerala were some of those states which were high performing states. So they were quick to latch on to this, smart tool and use it. The next initiative for COVID-19 that the SCM has taken is, of course, the creation of the empowered group of Niti Aayog who are seeking the support of WHO and UN for providing them technical assistance in monitoring and surveillance mechanisms. So we are not trying to fight it alone. We are already positively working with other with a global outreach, so to say, in order to combat this, because cities are international, as they are very global, and we need to take everybody on the platform on the same page in order to come up with solutions. I'll just give you an example. I was very impressed to see that within a few days, some apps have been developed to, and they are being used by the smart cities Surat, Bangalore, Nagpur, Agra, and Greater Chennai Corporation to handle the COVID. To give inputs on the code. Industry also has immediately risen to the occasion and provided mechanized technology for disinfecting streets. So mass disinfection of streets has taken place. Examples are Melvisharam municipality, where BHEL gave those, donated huge equipment to, disinfect the streets. Rajkot is using high clearance boom sprayers in order to disinfect. And if you see at the people level, people, again, as I say, are so important. Our social capital has come out in flying colors. Community kitchens have begun and volunteering has increased. And Raipur, which has, a food control room where all the people who are unable to access food have to just call help and are provided with. So also in Lucknow Municipal Corporation, so also Aligarh, Saharanpur, Chandigarh. Chandigarh buses have been, converted into essential. So this is how we have, within a few days of this pandemic, we have begun to respond. Now, this is the smarter part of it. Now, if you see, I've added two elements. There is demography, but I have now, put it into two parts, which is the industry and the people, because the spatial, the technology, industry, and the people. And my emphasis here is on these two. What is it that the economy, the city's economy will face? What should it do? What is it that the people in the city and their employment at stake, what should they be doing? So if you see that I had written a blog on March 24 about how the world would look like, post-COVID. Basically, I've been trained in a school of thought that is solutions oriented. This solutions oriented thinking helps me to begin thinking as to what should be the solution to a given problem. Because once there is a problem and we accept it as given, our mind should not get blocked. Our mind should actually open up the possibility of how quickly we should get out of the problem. So because of that, within I think the very next day of the Janta curfew, I wrote this on my blog, and I looked at rebuilding, that what would happen to some of the businesses and the reconstruction of their portfolios. So I had said that obviously agriculture will have to revive with more high-tech inputs, and localized supply chains will again come back into into importance, and we see that happening. Why I'm sharing the slide with you is how much of what I thought is actually now happening. Then, of course, I'm seeing global supply chains will be shortened in favor of localized manufacturing. So we have seen that localized manufacturing will grow And India is best suited for, we have our own domestic demand. So, there is scope for localized manufacturing to improve and increase. International labor will be affected because there'll be one more thing added into their entry cards, which will be health. So some of us might be adversely affected because some host countries might not make it easy for our labor to move into their countries. So seen that de-densification of cities is going to happen or must happen, and that is also part of being smarter than what we were. So urban planning will have to rise to the occasion, and we need to have some urgent plans in place in order to de-densify cities. Education, retail, and entertainment will obviously see a virtual rise in the use of we'll see a rise in the use of virtual, and travel and leisure will be in the short run the most affected. But I have foreseen that it's exactly here that the human spirit, human ingenuity should step in. So I had lastly written that the human spirit will triumph, and if you see further, I will be able to prove this to you. Now, which are the recovery facilitators? Of course, those four elements, I'm again concentrating only on industry and people. In industry, we have to focus on employment generation. We have to, as companies, we have to have more financial prudence at this point in time. We have to have two things that I would like to share with you here is altruism. I don't think we should be saying that I'm paying my employees, but there's no production happening. And how long do I? And so I asked the government for a stimulus. That's not the only way to look at things. I'm very clear that it is in such times that companies who are generally those who uh, who are the patrons of people, individual families and households, they have to be more altruistic. And that's why I would emphasize that all of us actually have to, these are the times we have to sit back and we have to think that it's all right, all that saving that I did or the reserves that I built as a firm, maybe I need to part with with a little bit of that amount at this point. But I know that my employee will give it back to me in full measure. I have many examples as recent as 2008, where some companies did not lay off their employees. They went to them and negotiated contracts, but kept them. And those employees have been the most loyal and the most productive. So I think we need to look at altruism at the level of the industry. And of course, I got a very interesting article the other day by Arun Mehra in the Economic Times, which talked of a particular giant of a conglomerate in India. Way back in the World War, they took some German families and employed them in their conglomerate here. And after they were sent back, because Germany was so devastated, it was trying to rebuild itself. So some of those company people had requested this conglomerate to be Tatas, basically to take a few of their families because engineers were without jobs. So the engineers with their families came and worked at Telco and were kept there for a few years and were paid their money and they lived here. And when they went back to Germany, Tata's even actually wrote back in 1953 saying that these people had come here and we kept them here, and what kind of compensation should we now pay to them? I mean, this was something that Krauss Maffei has never forgotten, and it has become such an important story in that company's history that they respect Tata. And actually, Arun Mehra once, when he was negotiating a very tough bank guarantee, one of the people on the other side, the Deutsche Bank, they spoke, one of the ex-employees of Krauss Maffei happened to tell this banker, the Deutsche banker, that if it is Tata's, it is a guarantee by itself. Please do not stop giving them that. See how these contracts, when Tata had no reason, they had actually done, they had only extended an altruistic, kind of a overture towards Krauss Maffei, but see how it came back to give them that return. So it's extremely important to rise beyond the obvious, that yes, I don't have money, so I'm, throwing you out of the job. It is something that anybody can do. But if we were to take this leadership exemplar of the Tatas, they did not. So they rose beyond that. And I think we should have our own stories to tell of how we have risen beyond, in this very, very somber time. And of course, people have to, have to be well informed. They have to be cooperative. They have to also have kindness. If we can, at our own level, household level, help the house help to, pay the house help and not remove her from the job, I think that will go a long way. We can again negotiate something with her or him, but we should keep them. So whether it is industry, whether it is people, kindness and altruism will have a role to play in the immediate or in the short term. And I would like to draw your attention to this fact. So the last, of course, is spatial and technology. And I think we have spoken a lot about that. In the spatial, we need to design infrastructure construction to ensure a clean and safe and sustainable environment. And in technology, again, we need infrastructure to enable all these. Let me just show you what I found on the net regarding the business threat by industries. This is a sample size of around 3,500 CEOs that was taken by YPO. And a quick, business sentiment was, a quick survey was taken. Obviously, you'll see at the top is hospitality, restaurant, aviation, retail, and education, energy, media, and automotive, which are very highly affected. And they see a high risk. The CEOs see a very high risk of not surviving this pandemic. This is a sentiment. If you see down below, you'll see that telecommunications and does not seem to have any threat. They're on the zero threat perception. The CEOs are very confident the business is not going to close down. Neither the trucking or transportation, neither the chemicals and mines and utilities, neither the law firms, and neither construction or the logistic firms. So you see what we have seen up till now, there is all those which are high touch industries are at the moment threatened. All those that are high tech industries are at the moment feeling safe. This is how it is playing out. And this is where going tech is going to be so much more important. So if you see, and I put the smart city wheel back again for your easy understanding of where I was concentrating, we have to get the smart economy back in action through productivity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We have to have smart living in terms of healthy, safe, and culturally vibrant and happy people. And we have to have smart people who embrace creativity and a 21st century education. And all this is tied up by smart governance, which is enabling a better, comeback for a proper functioning of the supply and demand side, for transparency and open data, and ICT and governance. So here is what I'm trying to underscore and keep saying, that we the people, we the industry, and the government, these are at the moment the most important priorities in getting us back on track. And if you see the same smart city wheel and you see the business threat, you will see that those in technology are the ones who are safe at the moment. Those who are which are high touch, hospitality, restaurant, etc., they need more entrepreneurship and innovation to get them out of this. Because as I said, nothing is a constant. This is not going to be the state, and this is only up to the short term that we will feel the pain of this. But creativity will get us out of these problems, and entrepreneurship and innovation is bound to get. This is the ingenuity of the human spirit I keep emphasizing on right from the beginning. I'm taking I'm building a case towards how we should be looking after people, because this is the outlook that I'm trying to, of the future that I'm trying to give you. I'm looking at the most affected. So who are the most affected people? the most affected people in our country are those who are self-employed, and as you see in the graph, who are casual wage employed, who have a casual wage employment. So the casual workers and the self-employed, they are the most susceptible in this time. Why are they susceptible? Simply because they are either homeless, they are officeless, and they're unbanked. They are the typical class of people who are generally working off the rent. So they comprise of cultivators and some allied activities like petty poultry people and all that, petty traders like hawkers on the roads, shop owners and grocers, non-professionals like carpenters, electricians, plumbers. And they also comprise of very high skilled variety, which is the doctors, the lawyers, the chartered accountants, the architects, and so on. Now, when we talk of these, they are 47% of our workforce, and they comprise of nearly less than half of our, 280 households. They are a huge number. So, what are we going to be doing for them is going to be very important. And here we need industry and we need governance. We need both of them to act, in ensuring that these people are taken care of. We have, fortunately, in place some schemes by the government which are already running, and we need to avail of them, which are the National Health Protection Scheme, the Life Cover, the Mudra Scheme, the Jan Dhan Yojana, and the pension plan. They are already there. What needs to happen is their penetration further into the beneficiary, adding more beneficiaries, and industry working with them in order to ensure that they are. So I've taken a couple of cases here. Now I see a city which is smarter than what I am living in. Say, take the food stall owner. We are talking about self-employed people, and we know that the wayside chai wala, the wayside, dosa maker, the wayside bhelpuri maker. These are people who are not in any net. They don't act, they don't function with licenses. They don't function with any kind of, overheads. They just open their stall early morning and they ply the trade. So obviously, pre-COVID, you will see their characteristics. They generally exhibit relatively poor hygiene, and they are not regulated by the government formally. They have no designated zone. They just open their shop anywhere in the middle of the street where they feel that they can, sell better. And they have no licenses. Their food is in the open, so you can see that it is pretty unhygienic. They do not wear gloves themselves. They do not wear caps. They do not have water, running water. So you will see that hygiene standards right now are very low. Do I want them to get off the streets? Absolutely not. We've got to preserve them. We've got to just make them work at a different normal. The new normal for them has to now be put into place in these next few months on a very urgent basis. So I looked at some other Asian countries. It's always good to, compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. So I looked at, say, Thailand. I looked at, say, Malaysia, and I found that street food is a big culture in Thailand, which is a touristy place. Most of Thailand's revenue comes out of its tourism, and they do also have open streets and they have open food, culture there. But there is some degree of government regulation that they are talking about. So you see some better hygiene. You have some designated areas. We have them, but they are more informal. These are the Yavavarat Road or the Khausan Road. These are the designated areas where the health inspectors and all would go and would, ensure that food is of a certain standard. Also, you have these agency like the local catering college, which has come to train the young street vendors in hygienic cooking. So you see in the picture below that this skills training has been provided by a local educational institution. And so from a suboptimal normal, they have moved to a new normal. This is the new norms that I am talking about. A new normal must come with the new norms that should go with it. And that's where my outlook, carries more strength. I'll give you another example in terms of our housemaids or house. You'll see that in India, an ILO study said that there was a 50% increase in domestic workers between 2001 and 2010. And 10 million domestic workers and nannies operated in India is what the ILO had come up with. There is another government statistic also available from the Ministry of Labor and Employment, which is more recent, which talks of 4.75 million are domestic workers, of which 3 million of them are women. So almost all of them, 2/3 of these are in the urban areas. Now, if you look at again these pictures and you look at a neighboring country, they have been able to organize house, in a much better manner than probably as yet in our urban areas. So definitely a smarter city will need to have new norms for the new normal to happen, while protecting the best interests of this lot of people who actually are the bulwark of our urban cities. We can go out and work only because they can come into our houses and work. Here is where we should be reorganizing and formalizing things. And here are some of the agencies that have to now work in tandem with each other: skilling agencies, the NGOs, the RWAs and housing societies, and the local corporators, who will bring together through a database system all this into being. So, what are the priorities for these for industry and people in this given? I'm almost at the end of my presentation now. So you can see that localized employment generation, which I had spoken about in my blog on the 24th of March, must be accompanied by new norms. If we miss this chance, we have missed it again, and we are not going to be able to put this into place because the mindset of the people is now that of being willing to, listen to more hygiene or more, more access, better facilities. Now, construction activities, I feel, will of course have to come into the fore, and they will generate employment. And I'm not saying this. All these points here, from construction right up to process industries, is said by the government. Already there are schemes in place. Every day I hear the news, and all the ministers have their plans in place. MSME protection, already we have seen some of the declared by the government. Rural development, Mr. Nitin Gadkari has said around 115 districts for village-based industries have been identified for rural employment and crafts and so on. Irrigation, again today I heard in the early morning news that many projects in irrigation have been kick-started and are ready for launching. So there's going to be a lot of construction taken up in the irrigation also. Financial announcements have already been made. Transport and road construction is going to get an added fillip, and Manrega is going to be used as the medium to transfer the wages to these people who work on these projects. Essential services and of course process industries are already working. Amitabh Kant had made and immediately within 2 weeks or so of the lockdown, he had made a presentation to the CII, and I've quoted some part of that. On the right hand side, of course, is what I am trying to say, that the new norms have to be targeted towards the bottom of the pyramid, and they can be in the way of healthcare schemes and stuff like that for them. Urgent skilling initiatives for jobs that have been lost. We need to do that. And I was very happy to note, I got a little piece of news was shared with me yesterday, that the people who have gone back to their hometowns, the migrants, or those who are already here kept back in the labor camps or wherever, the government has asked has asked an agency to map what kind of existing skills they have. So that's something very, very interesting. And that can be used as the database to decide what kind of further skills or reskilling that needs to be done for these people. So again, this is data, and we are using data to come up with a solution. Then, of course, we have signing up of government schemes, new beneficiaries identification. I think industry should do this, or all of us who are self-employed and who have people working for us, we should be able to keep a track of this, the new identification of beneficiaries, because many of them might slip back into poverty. Right now they are wage earners, but then when they stop being wage earners, they have to be recorded with the government. So we should be helping with that. Establishing new norms for business conduct, which includes health into it. And already I see from the news I have been tracking on World Economic Forum and Fortune and New York Times, companies abroad have already begun to factor in health as a major responsibility of the employer. So this is something that we will have to look into. And widespread use of data to conduct day-to-day activities using the data smart city strategy. So this is also what we should be now using more. I also, as I said, civic society has a huge role to play and industry has a huge role to play in this. So innovation and affirmative action, engagement in civic, building self-reliant and sustainability, data use of devices, and community outreach and leadership should be expanded and magnified far more than what we have done. So here it is not that we have not done, and it is not that we have not initiated. Here I'm emphasizing the speed of carrying this further. So I'm proposing that the new way of life in a smarter city is going to have three elements in it, which are human, which are spatial, and which are driven by technology, which are always going to be in a loop of integrating, of redesigning, of evolving, and again integrating the new things. I want to share a little bit of a perspective that whenever if I was a disaster management professional, or if I was serving in the armed forces, I would always be told that you need to be prepared. Am I right? I would always be told, and every single day will be chalked out in such a way that if an eventuality occurs, I should be prepared. Similarly now, smarter cities would mean that we the citizens, we the industry, we the government will always be prepared. Right? So as a society, you have seen Japan, which is so natural disaster. As soon as they are told of a warning of an earthquake, they simply shift into a higher higher location, and there is some shelters and all available to them. They have gotten used to it. They respond to it. I think we in our cities in India are not still used to responding to such things. We live our own lives, we live in our own microcosms, and we really do not understand the collective identity of living in a city. To be prepared. And why should cities be different from any of these, any of the other situations? Cities also face, we are vulnerable, we will face disasters. But the whole idea is, are we prepared? Because if I was to give you an analogy of our body, we always like to keep ourselves fit to overcome an eventuality, right? So we always train, we care about our diet, we train, we plan everything on a day-to-day basis, such that if something happens to me, I can get back, or I also postpone the fact that it may not happen. Similarly, a city is like an organism. If we keep our cells healthy and not allow them to degenerate, we are going to be prepared for a better, to combat any kind of a disaster better. So this is how I would like to, share that this should be the new way of life for a smarter city to evolve. And of course, I'm almost through. I'm done actually. Thank you for very patient listening. And I'm sorry if the bandwidth did not hold.
It's okay. It was clear, and it was a nice presentation, and we had a nice interaction. In fact, three most important things which you had made. One is altruism, people, industry, what needs to be done. In fact, I would just like to share one point what we have done at Ramco Cements. In fact, at our individual cement plants, wherever the villages are there surrounding those, we had taken a lot of initiatives which we have already mentioned in terms of desanitization and all that, and distribution of say PPEs, masks, and things like that. And in fact, we have done a lot of work even for Odisha government for that matter. In the state of Odisha, we have sent a lot of medical equipment. So the point that you are making is that all the industry, the individuals, the organization should come together, and we have been doing a lot of things in that aspect. And I am sure that this will take us and help us to avoid the crisis. Initiatives like this. Now, can we take the questions? Can we take the questions now? Some of the questions which have been posted.
Yes, sure.
Are you able to hear me? There is a slight disturbance in the bandwidth. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. So some of the questions that were given is how fast will construction industry be, coming back or coming back to this thing after the pandemic? What is your take on that? That is one of the questions. And what about the employees of construction industry? That is another concerned question that has been asked. So based on your research, what is your take on these two questions? Yeah. Were you able to hear my question?
Yes, I was. The first
Should
part
I repeat it?
I think I've understood. Please let me rephrase it and confirm whether I'm on track. You say that what is the outlook for the construction industry?
Right? How fast it will rebound?
How fast it will rebound. Now, the construction industry, I have, as I had said earlier when you had asked me a question through the midway in the session, the construction industry is a bulwark of our system. If you see steel and cement, it comprises a major portion of a wholesale price index. So obviously these are core industries, So whenever we talk of core industries, the attention of the government has to be on them. So core is agriculture, core is construction. So there is no doubt that there will be a lot that the government will do for kickstarting, and obviously the multipliers. That's 256 industries that are dependent on housing and construction. So those are bound to be. My personal take, I've been hearing a lot of the industry experts on this, and I would not want to contradict anything that they say, because it is all true. There are certain trepidations regarding migrant workers. They would want to go back, and whether they will come back or not, and stuff like that. So a lot has been discussed. Now, obviously, prudence is what is important, and I have mentioned this here. This is the time to be prudent. For instance, why would I avail of a government financial stimulus to launch a new project? I would not do that. I would look at existing inventory and I would try to, dispose that. That would be a very prudent way of handling my short-term crisis. The fact that I would like to add here, which probably, is a new view of things, is that if the lockdown is, let's say, lifted by the 1st of June, just to take an example, and if by the 1st of June, the migrant workers would want to go back, and the reason for them going back is not just that they have been away from the family, which they will. There are going to be projects that are available in their geographies.
Yeah.
You hear me?
We are able to hear you. Yeah, now we are able to hear you. Yes.
So the construction, yes, I was saying construction workers would go back not just to be with the families and to be closer in their own environs, but they would also go back if government projects to them, in their geographies. They would avail of Manrega instead of staying in the city. This is one. And two, during the monsoons, one should not be launching new projects. I would say that either complete whatever projects there are and not launch new ones, because anyways construction activities are on a lull during the monsoon. So it will be affected in the short run. Taking this into account, I would not say that everything will be fine and things will be hunky dory. Obviously, construction is going to be affected, but the government policies are like the balancing
balance here.
Where construction activities will continue, say, in the form of infrastructure building, if not real estate. This is what I foresee.
Another question which has been posted is that post COVID-19, what is going to happen for the smart city mission? Is it going to be affected?
It is going to get stronger, and I've already proven that to you.
Correct. So that already it has been proven in your presentation. It is going to, it is going to be much more relevant now.
Center stage.
Correct.
Yes.
It's going to be much more
stage now.
So I think that's it. Thanks a lot for your time. And any questions are there, we would be emailing it to you so that you can take it up if it's okay with you. If I send an email of all the questions to you. Fine. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm fine. Thanks so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
And before signing off, let me thank you once again for having come and shared your inputs. And to the viewers, we also have one more interesting topic in the afternoon at 4 p.m. on concrete quality and practical aspects at construction sites. So that is the webinar that is going to be there in the evening at 4 p.m. Those of you who are interested, please log in, and we would be having a very interesting topic on construction related aspects. So thank you, Dr. Mona Shah, and it has been a good thing, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. So we sign off from the event and be in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.